We are finally back with the Season 2 premiere of House of the Dragon, and unfortunately, we aren't off to the greatest start. A plethora of fans seem to agree with my view that, though it had some great moments, this episode was pretty poorly written. Today I'll be breaking down some of the key moments and pieces of information we got, as well as what didn't quite work, particularly in relation to the source material, Fire and Blood. Let's start where the episode did, with Jacaerys' trip to Winterfell to gain the loyalty of House Stark for the Black faction. This loyalty was just about guaranteed, as Cregan Stark's now deceased father swore an oath to Rhaenyra back in episode 1 of the first season, and the Starks are not ones to break their oaths. However, what comes into question is the scale of their loyalty. Rather than pledge the majority of their forces to Rhaenyra's cause, Cregan only promises 2,000 men who are already old and likely to die anyway come winter. His justification for this lackluster offering is the necessity for his forces to be focused on defending the North from what lies beyond the Wall. Unlike the Starks at the outset of Game of Thrones, it seems that this generation of Starks has much more of a prioritization on and involvement with the Night's Watch and their protection of the Wall. After all, Cregan's opening monologue explains that 1 in every 10 members of their family are sent to the Wall for life, something that they consider an honor, not a burden. Additionally, when questioned on this emphasis by Jacaerys, Cregan cryptically explains that what awaits them beyond the Wall is death, heavily hinting that this generation of Starks is keenly aware of the White Walker threat, an awareness that seems to have dwindled immensely by Ned Stark's time. Another key nugget of information that we get from Cregan and Jacaerys' brief conversation is that Jacaerys, the king before Viserys, visited the Wall, but his dragon was simply unable to fly beyond it. This is a very important element from the book Fire and Blood that I'm glad the show managed to fit in. Overall, however, I was very disappointed by the show's handling of Jacaerys' time in the North. This visit was a very important part of the book, one that provides us with quite a bit of story and sets up many of the events to come. In the book, Jacaerys spends a significant amount of time at Winterfell before returning to Dragonstone, becoming ingrained in the Stark family and culture and developing a very close friendship with Cregan. Not only are there rumors that Jacaerys fell in love with Sarah Snow, Cregan's bastard sister, almost forsaking his marriage vows to Rhaena to be with her, but there are even rumors that this deep romance was actually with Cregan himself. It's a shame that we didn't get any of this depth in the show. I was quite honestly expecting Jacaerys to spend around half of the season in Winterfell. Who knows, maybe he'll return at a later point and some of this story will end up being covered. Additionally, this is more of a nitpick, but why did Cregan take Jacaerys all the way to the Wall in the first place rather than just discuss everything at Winterfell? I know he was likely trying to show Jacaerys the importance of the Wall as justification for not giving as many soldiers to Rhaenyra's cause, but if they had to make this additional trip, why didn't they just fly there on Jacaerys' dragon? We see that they arrived at the Wall with a traveling party on foot at the outset of the episode. A journey from Winterfell to the Wall by foot could take weeks, but it would only take hours on Dragonback. Staying on Jacaerys for a minute, his return to Dragonstone and reunion with his mom Rhaenyra is perhaps the best scene in the episode. Rather than show any emotion, Jacaerys tries to remain completely professional at first, robotically relaying the results of his travels. It's all the news we expected. House Arryn and House Stark have both pledged fealty to Rhaenyra. However, both come with conditions. The Arryns require the protection of the Vale via a dragon, and as we discussed, the Starks are only sending 2,000 soldiers so far. Before Jacaerys can even finish relaying the news, however, both he and his mom break down in tears over the death of his little brother, Lucerys, showcasing such incredible performances from both of them. Emmett Darcy played Rhaenyra so perfectly in this episode, showcasing her desperation in her search for her son Lucerys, her heartbreak in finally finding his remains, and her desire for vengeance in her command that Aemond be killed. But we'll get back to Aemond and the rest of the Green faction shortly. Early in the episode, we see another key member of the Black faction, Corlys Velaryon, overseeing the construction of his fleet, the ships of which are to be used in the growing Black faction blockade of King's Landing. These construction efforts are seemingly being led by a man named Alan of Hull. Though we don't know much about Alan just yet, Corlys seems to have taken a keen interest in him. Moving past the blockade and over to King's Landing, we are thrown right back in with the Green faction as we see Alicent and Criston Cole have begun having an affair. Since this episode seemingly only takes place weeks after the death of King Viserys, I wonder if this affair had begun prior to his death. Regardless, as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Criston is explicitly forbidden from having sexual relations with anyone, especially the royal family. Alicent and Criston then immediately head to a meeting of Aegon's small council, appearing to consist of Alicent and Criston, of course, Hand of the King Otto Hightower, Tywin Lannister, and a man named Jasper Wilde. As we soon see, Aegon has seemingly given an unofficial position in this council to his brother Aemond, much to the dismay of the other members. This small counciling mostly serves as a recap of information we already know. The Starks and Arryns haven't replied to Otto's letters, inferring that they are loyal to the Black faction, which we've already seen from the Black's perspective. The Green faction, however, has the full support of House Baratheon, and in turn, the Stormlands. If you recall, Aemond secured their loyalty at the end of last season with his marriage to one of Boris Baratheon's daughters. The Green faction also has the full support of the Lannisters and the Hightowers, giving them the allegiance allegiance of the Reach in the Westerland regions. Sitting between those regions and King's Landing, however, are the Riverlands, whose loyalties are completely up in the air. Both Daemon and Aemond have expressed strong desire to travel there and conquer the region for their respective factions, so we'll see who comes out on top as the season progresses. Before moving away from this small council meeting, I want to make a quick note of their need for a master of ships. The Black faction, of course, has Corlys, who heads the strongest fleet of ships in the Seven Kingdoms. However, the Green faction small council throws out the possible name of Dalton Greyjoy. He's the head of House Greyjoy, ruler of the Iron Islands, and ancestor to characters like Theon, Yara, and Euron from Game of Thrones. After the small council meeting finishes up, Alicent encounters Larry Strong, who subtly hints that he knows of her affair with Kristen. Since Larry seems to have a creepy obsession with Alicent, this is not good. He also explains that he had her old staff killed due to their apparent disloyalty and replaced them all with staff of his own choosing, further expanding his prying eyes on Alicent. Alicent just can't catch a break, as she also has immense frustrations with her dad Otto. Throughout the small council meeting, he was undermining all of her ideas. We also see him explicitly manipulating Aegon's decisions during his court session. Otto clearly has strong influence over Aegon, an influence that Alicent worries will melt away Aegon's willingness to listen to her. Otto seemingly understands his daughter's concerns and promises to work with her rather than against her. Working together, they can manipulate Aegon through the novelty of his reign, while he still cares about the actual running of his kingdom. Once the novelty wears off, the running of the kingdom will eventually fall to them too. Though Otto and Alicent seem happy with their new understanding and arrangement, Larys has other ideas. He corners Aegon and tries to manipulate him into choosing a new hand of the king. We'll just have to wait and see if Aegon heeds Larys' advice. Now, before we dive into the climax of this episode, there are a few minor points I wanted to touch upon. Early in the episode, Mysaria escapes King's Landing and arrives on Dragonstone. In her interactions with Daemon, we see her behaving incredibly out of character from her usual spymaster self. Is she just putting on an act, or is this just bad writing? We'll just have to wait and see. I really like the juxtaposition of the Black faction's funeral for Lucerys with Alicent's personal prayer. Alicent's mention of Lucerys in her prayers for the recently deceased reminds us that deep down, she still genuinely cares about Rhaenyra. I admit, the point I'm about to make is incredibly nitpicky, but when both Rhaenyra and Aegon are introduced to their courts and councils, they are referred to as King of the Andals, Rhoynar, and the First Men. The inclusion of the Rhoynar in this list is all well and good in Game of Thrones, but at this point in the timeline, the Targaryens haven't successfully annexed Dorne into the Seven Kingdoms. For background, the Rhoynar were a people that underwent genocide from the Valyrian Freehold, which, if you recall, is the empire that House Targaryen originated from. The survivors of the Rhoynish genocide escaped and settled in Dorne, meaning that they aren't yet part of the Seven Kingdoms. Is this inclusion in the list simply just a point of arrogance from House Targaryen or an oversight from the writers? It's hard to say. Anyway, that's it for my small points and nitpicks. Let's jump into the core of this episode, the murder of Aegon's heir, Jacaerys. This murder, known as the Blood and Cheese incident in the book, was changed drastically in the show, and most definitely for the worse. The Blood and Cheese incident is one of the most disturbing sequences in the book. One author, George R. R. Martin, likely intended to be akin to the Red Wedding or Joffrey's assassination at his wedding. In the show, we see Rhaenyra give the order for Aemond to be assassinated. In the book, however, Rhaenyra gives no such order. In fact, she has no involvement in this incident whatsoever, not knowing of its occurrence until its aftermath. In the book, it's up to reader interpretation as to whether the incident was instigated by Daemon or Mysaria. There's even a theory that it was instigated by Larys, the direction I thought this episode would take after he seemingly figured out Alicent and Kristen's affair. However, the starkest difference is that the mission was not to kill Aemond at all. It was actually intended from the get-go to be a mission to torture Helaena and kill one of her and Aegon's children, showcasing the true power of the Black faction. Blood and Cheese are much more confident assassins of the book as well, infiltrating the palace and finding Helaena and Alicent, who was actually there for the incident, with ease. Rather than simply ask Helaena who the male heir is, as in the show, they force her to choose which child she'd rather them kill, threatening the rape of her and her children if she doesn't. After she chooses one, they purposely kill the other, causing Helaena to break down in a screaming fit. The scene we got in the show, however, held none of the disturbing horror of the book. Rather than skilled assassins, we got bumbling idiots. Rather than psychologically torture Helaena with a choice, they simply couldn't be bothered to check themselves to see which child is which. Though still somewhat disturbing, the scene worked nowhere near as effectively as it did in the book. Another factor that ruins this sequence is how Daemon set it into action in the first place. If he came all the way to King's Landing and bribed his way in, why wouldn't he just do the deed himself? After all, as shown in season 1, he knows the secret passages of the castle better than anyone else. Also, if the intention really was to assassinate Aemond, how could he trust these two idiots to do the deed? Aemond is one of the most skilled fighters alive, and Daemon leaves the job to a city watchguard and a rat catcher. Also, you only need one man to kill a toddler. Why wasn't the other holding Helaena in place so she couldn't escape and report them? It just doesn't make any sense. Still, what's done is done. This is the version of the incident we got in the show, and there's no changing that. With the Black faction retaliating arguably with more ferocity than the Green faction's instigation, aggression is bound to grow exponentially. Overall, though I was definitely disappointed with this episode, I'm still incredibly optimistic for the rest of the season to come. If there's anything you think I might have missed or any questions you might have, be sure to let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see future episode breakdowns, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next week for Season 2, Episode 2.